Go ahead, Bill.
What is that called?
This is a stipulation of settlement.
Stipulation?
Stipulation of settlement.
Yeah, I make a motion for us to accept the, approve the stipulation.
Just read that.
Resolution authorizing the settlement of the litigation BLD, the Farm LLC versus the town of Southampton et al. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. And
Now you can adjourn. the
yeah,
meeting if you
well,
want.
Mary Lee was going to come in and do her environmental presentation unless she just disappeared.
No, I see a leg.
She's there.
Yeah.
Come on in, Marilee.
Oh, great.
How you doing?
How are you?
Good. We're good.
Thank you very much for coming.
Absolutely. So,
You need to be seen, I
I
think.
need to be there.
Yep.
Okay, excellent. So,
You're being recorded.
great. I want this to make a move. Excellent. I don't know if I've stood here before. I've stood here before, haven't I? So at any rate, I'm here today as a member of Sagaponic's agricultural community, also as a member of the zoning board of appeals, and then I have this magnificent role in Southampton where I'm the chair of the agriculture committee. And the idea, I had a meeting there last night, which kind of reinformed me as what I wanted to talk to you guys about today. Because I think what happens sometimes in Southampton is an indication of what's going to happen here, or actually what's happening here is having repercussions in Southampton. And so originally I wanted to talk to you about how ag reserves are part of our community and the reason ag reserves exist, which they really came out of when this place was being subdivided like mad, probably in the 60s, but then the ag reserves didn't come into existence. I believe it was the early 90s or late 80s. And so whenever subdivision goes in, 60% is set aside. If it's prime ag soils, like most of Sagaponic is, that's supposed to stay in agriculture. And there's a lot of rules around what creates a farm. And New York State Ag and Markets basically has these really clear guidelines for what constitutes agriculture. And that goes like on one extreme would be horse farms, and on the other extreme would be, let's just say, row crops, like we traditionally see a lot of in Sagaponic. In that time, so the idea with these ag reserves that it was actually farmers mainly subdividing their land, right? So they imagined that the farmer would hold on to the ag reserve and he would pay a state tax by selling off 1 or 2 house lots. But really the idea was that this would be a way to keep the balance of the property in agriculture. Of course, other things kicked in, like it really became a great place to have a house. So, and then subdivision process got really expensive. So in some cases, what started happening is the farmer just wholesale selling the piece of property, the developer puts in the subdivision, and then the farmer doesn't actually own anything at the end of the day. He sold it, maybe retained a house lot for some of his kids. So there are these ag reserves throughout all of Southampton town, and I see them as being a genius idea of a way to keep agriculture here. But what's happened is as those properties have passed into non-agricultural ownership, they're not fully being utilized for their agricultural values. And now what's happening is lawsuits, because the current owners of them have very different expectations of how they can be utilized. And I think this is the biggest issue that us as the Ag Committee in Southampton Town is facing. And we are a small advisory committee. We are regularly ignored. Our advice is regularly ignored because our advice is almost always, these should be inspected for agricultural use. And they're not, because Southampton doesn't really have a mechanism by which they start enforcing them, because you really can't force somebody to farm. Like, that never worked and it never will. So the problem in some cases, so this is the problem you guys will have to deal with, because I started going through Sagaponic, sort of listing the various ag reserves and how they're being utilized. And one of the lawsuits does involve an ag reserve, as you guys all know, right down on the beach there, which is an ag reserve that I've somewhat farmed with the people who own it, and they are trying very hard to farm it. However, there's a golf course on an ag reserve on Parsonage Lane. And then there's ag reserves that, some of them are abandoned tree farms. Actually, Sagaponic's ag reserves are fairly intact based on a preliminary, me going up and down every road. There are some that are fallow and have been fallow for a long time, and they don't belong to farmers. They belong to people who are going to build a large house on the end of them and use the balance of the ag reserve as a really big house lot. And so in some cases, ag reserves have been licensed to be part of a house lot, totally illegal, but there's again, no enforcement mechanism. And I personally wrote a letter to the town of Southampton recommending a moratorium on any change of use building. Most ag reserves have a building envelope, which is for greenhouses. If it's going to become a horse farm, that's where the indoor riding arena, of course, it really changes when a horse farm's involved because it's not going to be row crops. So there's going to be a lot of dirt that gets moved there. And they usually end up site plan review, maybe zoning boards. And I think about this a lot because without ag reserves, nobody except for the few farms that exist can continue. They have no opportunity because they're too expensive. And I don't know in this great country how you can tell somebody that there's a ceiling of what their property's worth. Oh no, sorry, you can only sell it to a bona fide farmer. That just doesn't fly. Some of what the village has tried to do is to get people to arrive at a good solution by coercive legislation, maybe like some of the things that the Architectural and Historic Review Board has done, like they might not have teeth, but they've convinced people to build a different style of house.
You're good at that.
They're good at that. People downright give up and sell the house lot to someone else. But one of the things that I think might help, of course it could make it way worse, is that as what's going to happen, even if it's not happening now, is slowly the owners of ag reserves, even if they're farmers, are going to be looking for ways to better develop them for use. So they might just come to you with an application, I need to put up a greenhouse, right? Or they might need something more substantial, a greenhouse and a farm stand. They need the infrastructure to do it. But I think what's more likely is we're going to see a lot of applications for worker housing based on not really sure if there's a farm there or not. And I guess my thoughts are on this, sitting in this situation in Southampton town, is there's a lot of back and forth about who actually is in charge of an ag reserve, and besides the owner, of course. And I personally think one of the places that they should start, rather than with the planning board, is actually with the zoning board. And the reason I think that is because the zoning board can really balance an argument that's being made, and they can also take all of these ag reserves have easements, and the language is actually as clear as any of our laws, meaning a lawyer can totally change what it means. But I would say that a zoning board is actually better equipped to discover the intricacies of these easements that go with the land, and from the beginning make the owner realize that what they own is not a house lot, is not even an accessory to a house lot. They were saved specifically to give us food stability in this community and our immediate region. And it seems all fine to let them pass into questionable use when we're well fed and our economy is doing well. But the final thing I wanted to say about ag reserves is agriculture in this country feeds about 80% of the wildlife, whether they want to or not. We sustain migratory flocks. We used to sustain a lot more deer. They've moved back into house lots, but specifically birds, and what we're now learning, really crucial insects. Even though they might often be the enemy of the farmer, a lot more farms, mine included, is discovering there's this incredible sort of interface of insects that balance each other out in the ideal situation. There are, of course, we all know there are times you really do need to go in and deal with a pest, because largely something else is out of balance, but those questions can't be asked when you're faced with crop failure. But our ag reserves, therefore, it's important that they don't become botanical gardens for private use, because botanical gardens do not support the community or the wildlife that needs our communities to survive. And those are just my thoughts about ag reserves, because I know that the village is dealing with at least one situation on the beach. And in our meeting last night, they talked about it. We talked about it briefly. And it sounded like it's coming back to the village to solve. That Southampton, even though they have the original easement, that they're not looking to solve the problem. So it will be in front of you, and maybe by some default in front of the zoning board, being what they're asking for, which I believe is housing above the barn. So I'm happy to answer. I'm always happy to answer questions about agriculture, because I think that even though you guys all pretty much lived here, grew up here, and have seen farms your whole life, some people really, like, it's really abstract to them. And it's not, we have a situation in Southampton that's been in the papers, we call it 625 Lumber Lane, where this guy really didn't know what he bought. He did not understand he bought an ag reserve and that it had this crazy easement. He could have gone through the documents when he bought the property probably, but he was probably counseled that it really doesn't mean anything. It's an abandoned tree farm, do what you want with it. Now that he realizes what he actually owns, he's working really hard to meet the demands of the agricultural easement on that property. And will it be possible? I'm not sure, because he still wants a putting green. But I think part of the problem is that these ag reserves haven't been treated seriously. And they were being treated seriously because they were in agricultural hands and they are being farmed, but once they are sold outside of that, they are being treated very differently. And so whatever, they need to be respected. And I think that as a village, I think we have enough agriculture here, and I think we could take the lead on it to a degree, because I think Southampton isn't going to do anything. Because I don't think they have, right now, I don't think there's a political will. And it just drives up property values and doesn't help agriculture, which is why they exist. So that's my spiel. Does anybody have anybody want to argue with anything I said?
Not at all. Not at all.
But I'm happy to, again, these are all my opinions, which I formed just by having lived a certain number of years, but also my parents were both very, very involved with land preservation, not just of their own farm, but of the East End. My mother and father are both kind of at the forefront of some of these pushes. So I, see it as a responsibility I have to both our community and my family's farm. So, happy to, yes.
Quick question, not to argue, I swear.
Yeah.
Have you seen any ag easement language that addresses the eventuality, if the easement area is purchased or passed into the hands of someone who's not interested in farming, or for whatever reason the farming use ends?
Yeah.
How the easement area should be treated? Should it be landscaped, lets her revegetate naturally, wooded?
The default setting is mowed annually. However, every easement is different, to some modest degree. So some will go into pretty good detail about talking about prime ag soils. And so at that point, when it was subdivided, in some cases, if it was a farm family subdividing it, they might have actually reserved the best soils for their farm as the ag reserve. Like we did that on a parcel. But they're all different, and that's part of the reason that they, I think, have been easy to ignore, because there isn't necessarily contiguity between them. And so one guy on Lumber Lane, his easement says something different for the guy down in Mecox. But the baseline is that they have to be mowed. If they've obviously gone into like a tree farm, then of course there's the ongoing maintenance of the trees. What's happened all over Bridgehampton though, as the tree industry changed, I think a lot of people have been getting big trees elsewhere. They're abandoned. And they might be amazing habitat for certain things, but other tree farmers tell me they're actually a problem because you have diseases cooking in there, nobody's monitoring. And they're pretty magnificent, humongous abandoned tree farms in the, off of Scuttle Hole Road in particular. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you guys for
Shirley.
listening, and
Thank you for coming.
yeah, and I think that as you guys, as I said, I do farm part of Stones Throw, which I know is a thorn in the side of the village. Just because I work there doesn't, I work for them doesn't, I think I can be fairly impartial in what, you know, if that does come to the zoning board, that I would likely have to recuse myself, I'm imagining. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Take care.
Thank you.
We make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.